All right, and recording. So, Anton, tell me about yourself.
Hello, Alex. Hello, everybody. My name is Anton. I'm from Berlin at the moment. Originally, I'm from Russia. For the past 13 years, I've been working with mobile, but one way or another. I started even before Google released Android. For the past 6 years, I've been working on a news application for the German market. Yeah, basically showing news for people. The audience is quite big, but the application is not that huge, let's say.
Okay. All right, that was short and sweet. So the task we're going to be solving today, we're going to be designing Amazon. Like, are you familiar with Amazon app?
Amazon app? Do they even have an app?
Oh yeah.
They have a packed web view, as far as I recall. Last time I checked.
I believe they did lots of different stuff. It was React Native. I'm not aware of current technology, but basically the idea would be building an online shop. Online shop like Amazon.
Online shop like Amazon. Okay, should I share my screen so I could start taking notes? So, share the entire screen. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so
can you make it a bit bigger because on the recording it would be hard to see.
Yeah, okay, so I went to 100%. Okay, let's see. I'll do a couple lists here. One would be resources. Something I would be very interested in. Another would be scope and size. And keep in mind, something like that. So which kind of resources do I have? So by resources, I mean team size, skill set of the team, how fast do we need to release and things like that.
Let's imagine that you work on a scale of Amazon.
So scale of Amazon, this mean endless teams?
Yeah, so you can fairly big team.
Would this also mean that I need to get to the market very fast? I guess Amazon wants to grab everything.
Let's assume that we're building for production, so it's not like MVP. We need to ship something.
Okay. So in terms of the skill set of the team, I guess I have flexibility then.
Let's assume that mostly juniors.
Mostly juniors.
Yeah, so you might have like someone senior, or you might be the senior person, and then you have more like level one, level two. I can't remember the exact levels.
Yeah, I also don't know the exact levels you guys use in the big companies. So junior would be someone who knows Android good enough to build a small feature, or
it's someone who would require some guidance. Let's put it this way.
Okay. I have nobody to guide except me.
Let's assume that the team is pretty big, so it's big enough that we can hit like all the issues when you're not like doing it by yourself. Like people can step on each other's toes, etc.
So makes sense. And I guess I can assume that the application will be supported for a long time and needs to add new features and things like that with the big team. Okay, in terms of scope and size, I can already do some guesses for devices, platforms, users, and countries. That's everything.
Yes, we're shipping worldwide.
Everything there is. Okay. So things to keep in mind, we can feel it later. In terms of requirements themselves, what should be in the app besides, so showing the listing of products to purchase.
Yeah, so imagine you start with basically like a search bar. So search bar and some recommendations, right? It's like you don't really need to worry about how you are going to build the recommendation list. Let's assume that you already have a backend for this, but you have to display recommendations, and you might also want to see like some cards. So for example, if there are like any kind of sales happening, you want to see as well. And you also want to have a shopping cart when you would put all your items. And one of the requirements that we want the shopping cart to be synchronized across different devices. So if you put something on the web, you should see it on device as well, and vice versa.
So in terms of the screens, we have this main screen where we search for stuff and we see recommendations and listing. Do we have a details screen?
Yes, you can like pick detail, and then you can like basically every product can have like different attributes. So if you're talking about shoes, it can be like color and the size. If we're talking about something else, it will be like the quantity. So imagine you're buying something in bulk. So like 1 item, 3, etc.
Anything for offline probably doesn't make sense. Products needs to be fresh, prices need to be fresh. But maybe, I don't know, favorites?
I would say that your shopping cart should persist. So if you put something in a shopping cart and, for example, the network connection goes away or you killed the app, you should come back and see like everything you put already.
So local cache for the cart. But the full offline is not needed. Okay. What else would I need? Well, I think this should be enough for now. Maybe later we can expand.
Okay.
Things to keep in mind that we might want to discuss if we want to, but something to mention. So crash reporting would be needed, some kind of tool for that.
I would say let's not worry about it. Let's leave it out of scope.
So,
reporting analytics, we can leave it out of scope for now.
Yeah, these are just things that I want to mention that are also important for the project, but we don't need to discuss them. Sdk abstractions, if we want to use any SDKs, so they don't bite us. Remote config, and the thing that might be quite important is GDPR. I don't know if we want to discuss anything about
Yep, it's a very good thing to mention.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll keep these lists on the screen for now so that we can always refer back to them. I'll start drawing something. Let's see. So I'll just scope it like this. And let's say that this part would be backend. So backend would need to be quite reliable for this whole thing because lots of products, lots of different kind of data that needs to be delivered to the devices. I would assume there are already APIs available. So if we want to touch backend in this interview, let's mention this later so we can dig deeper. I have some experience with the backend.
We can scope everything to the client and probably API. So if we have time, we can discuss API itself.
Okay. So another kind of piece of the design that two pieces of the design that I want to extract. So this will be our app itself. So this is client. And this thing, it doesn't have to run on the backend. It can run on the client, but let's call it kind of like a domain. I don't have a good name. But the main idea of this thing is to be the middle layer between our API on the backend and our client.
Okay.
This part can be built in the client itself. So this can be just another module that you run your data through before you show anything on the screen. But the idea of this module would be to transform between two kind of entities. So this I'll fill with something. So this would be client entities. And here would be kind of backend entities. Here we have some kind of transformation. So the data coming from the API will be read in some form. So I don't know exactly in which form backend will be built, I guess, some kind of JSON, but this would be agreed with the backend team. We would parse it to some kind of backend entities. Then we can run here the transformer, and here we can also have any business logic that we might think about.
So can you justify the existence of the transformer?
So the idea that I have is that business logic could be written once and not twice between multiple platforms that are going to need to be supported, multiple kind of clients, because we are building for the world. We need to take into account that there will be very slow devices, very fast devices, people with network connections issues and things like that. So there is a big chance that we might need to build multiple apps because different markets will have different requirements. And also there is always web, there are always iOS. And if we can put all the business logic in some kind of common layer, we can reuse it. And we can keep clients very simple. And the idea is that we build a set of client entities. This would be data classes that we can, or it doesn't need to be data classes. This can be like a meta language that we can define. It can be in JSON, it can be another kind of format. But the idea is that this is the language that our client understands. And this communication can be then much smoother. But we need this kind of abstraction because backend built by another team, it can be implemented in different ways. There can be changes, API deprecations, and things like that. So we can abstract everything away in this layer. And the idea that I have also is that this thing could be run in the backend, in the cloud. There can be heavy caching between client and our backend domain. And this is kind of responsibility of the team. Would be the tricky part would be building this with the mostly juniors. But if we say there's a big team, we can always find somebody to work on this. In the worst case, I think I should be able to handle this myself. This layer is not the real backend, as I call it. This is just a transformation between one type of entities into another. Yeah, and if there is any business logic that we might want, we can solve it here. Another idea for this language that we can communicate to the client here, we need to kind of really define how the data is structured. So come up with a good structure that our client will be comfortable understanding. And if we are building this kind of feed, so we are showing products, we are showing offers, we are showing sales, promotion cards, and things like that, recommendations. We can come up with a JSON structure that will be well defining our list of things that we need to display.
Okay, I think I got the gist of it. So yeah. Just one. Okay,
so out of here we get a list of JSON list, an array with data classes that describe which kind of products. Like there will be a product model for a product, or there will be a model for the promotion card sale and for recommendation, things like that. And this is then delivered to the client. So now let's think, how can we build a client? If we are building for a very big scope, we would want to split the client into multiple small pieces that can be then built by different feature teams. But I would want to start with kind of API or data layer for the client. And then, of course, there will also be some kind of UI layer. I don't want to make it big. I think it's, in my opinion, UI layer is not that important. It can be built on anything. It can be even like a web view or whatever. Whatever team is comfortable working with. The data layer would also, it should also be possible to split it to multiple feature teams if necessary, but this could also be like a single core team, depending on how many client apps do we need to support. Okay, so let's see back to our requirements and the app itself. We need the shopping cart that is sync across devices persisted in case network goes down. So in this layer, there would be some kind of processing, because we might want to process the data that we got from our domain, from the backend. Even if it's very well built for our client, we might need to add local favorites. For example, if favorites are not synchronized all the way to the backend and they're strictly local, we might want to enrich our data with some kind of information. So there will be this layer of processing, or like post-processing after we got stuff from the network.
Okay, I have a quick question. So you have a transformer which transforms from network entities to model classes. Why would you need another post-processing?
In case there is something client-specific. So the way I would suggest to build the client app is as much data-driven as possible. So the UI should be purely data-driven. So ideally, like here, after the data layer chewed our client entities coming from the backend, the UI should just show this data on the screen somehow. It doesn't need to hold any kind of logic. So if there is any logic left to do, like if there is local favorites that we need to add, or there is something that depends on the device, some kind of configuration that uses some kind of settings that user have enabled, I don't know, GDPR maybe. So GDPR would be a good example. User have selected in the GDPR settings that he doesn't want to see, or he doesn't want to track, or he doesn't want to see some kind of advertising or whatever. And the job of this would be in this data layer to chew this and do this.
Got it.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, the first layer, the transformer, is basically, it goes from a network entity to model class. And the second one, it's more like a use case. So you may apply some kind of conditional logic. So it's not like just moving one class to another. It could be something more complex than this, right?
It can be. I don't want to use exactly the term use case because it's more about the exact things that need to be implemented in the architecture. And architecture is not that important, I think, because it might change depending on the use case. The main idea is that, as I'm saying here in the client entities, there is just a list of data classes. After the data goes through, there's still a list of data classes, maybe exactly the same. Maybe some of those have some extra information that is only present on the client, or depends on the user settings. And then UI just gets a list of data classes and needs to make it look nice.
Okay, so basically it's also something like a view model mapping. So you get from model classes to something you can render, right?
Not exactly. The view model would be the part of the UI layer. This is presentation. So how should I make it more clear?
So basically, try to justify the existence of this component.
This post-processing?
Why exactly? Yes, why exactly it's needed?
Let me come up with an example. Well, I already used favorites. So let's say that our domain backend, and this whole architecture is kind of server-driven UI. So server, this layer that I'm showing right here, right now, it drives the UI. And let's say that we know, well, it's not in the requirements, but I'm just guessing now because I need to build now the engine that's going to run this thing. So if there's a requirement to display favorite products on the start page where the recommendations are, on the recommendations there could be favorite products. This layer could be sending just a placeholder that, yeah, this user, there should be some kind of favorites there. And then the client, if there is a database that stores those favorites, it could be reading from the database and creating those data classes, adding them to the list, and then passing this to the UI for UI to display.
Got it.
Okay, I'll continue then.
Yep.
We still have the shopping cart that needs to sync and persist for the network. So clarification for the requirements, do we need to sync cross-platform, or we sync only Android or only iOS? So what if user has one Android and one iOS device, like an iPad?
We would like to sync them all.
Okay, so then it needs to go all the way to the backend so that we can sync. So it comes.
Like, I don't really want to push it to any solution. So like, why do you think it should go to the backend, and what are alternatives?
Well, I was thinking that if this would be only one platform, we could use on Android, for example, there's a way to back up shared preferences data to the user. And then if a user has the same user in the Google Play or the same Google account has another device, they could sync back and we could reuse them. But if it needs to go between platforms, then we need some kind of other solution that will be common for us. So I'm guessing there would need to be something on the backend. So in that case, I would need to. So right now we're mostly in the read path. So we are like reading data and showing it, and there would also be some kind of writing write path. So, but going back to the shopping cart. There would be some kind of storage. So the workflow would be user clicks, adds to the cart, and we need to store it. So we would need some kind of this repository thing. And it's commonly used. As far as I recall, repository kind of supposed to store some data, but not everybody is really storing or caching anything in the repository, and repository is more like API usually. But the idea is that, yeah, then there would be this repository or API to call. We are adding the item to the shopping cart. This will be saved to the storage. And in addition, we need some kind of synchronization of that. So if we are going all world and any kind of devices need to be supported, then I'm guessing we need to like batch send this batch sync. The idea would be that this could be a service that makes sure the user has good network connection. Maybe there is even configuration for the user, like only sync stuff when I'm on Wi-Fi and things like that. The service would then communicate from the storage and prepare some kind of messages that can be sent to the backend. And on the backend, we would need also some kind of storage. Yes. Of course, there would be an API. It will not communicate directly to the storage, so it will go through some kind of API layer that user have added a shopping cart. Do we need to log in the user, or are those users anonymous?
We would need like logging out and authentication, but we can leave it out of scope. So let's assume that magically the user is already authenticated. So
both is out of scope, but then I would guess there is some kind of JSON Web Token used to identify the user. The user is then logged in somehow. There will be another layer that is out of scope about authentication and everything. The JSON Web Token is communicated back. And then we can identify this user and this component in the storage so that we could save it properly and then know which user to go back to. Sorry, there's some kind of noise.
No, it's okay. I'm muted.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
So please, guys, mute yourself if you're not the candidate.
Okay, so if with authentication we know the user, we can pass this token to the backend, and the backend can store this thing in some kind of storage. Which kind of storage exactly we can discuss if you want.
Okay, so basically you have domain layer, right? And I saw that it belongs to the client, because if it's not, like, what would transformer do?
Well,
Like,
let's put it like this then, so that because we are still not sure if this will be run on the backend. I think it's a good idea to run on the backend, because then this whole thing can be built once and then shared between multiple clients, be it iOS, web, app, or whatever. But if we don't have resources to build a fully blown backend with infrastructure and everything, we could run this thing on the client, this layer.
So can you select one approach?
I would prefer the approach where this runs in the backend. I think this is the best. So if I have resources, looks like I have a big team. The only question mark would be juniors. I would prefer to run this on the backend.
Got it.
Also easier to long-term support if there is any change in the business logic or a new kind of thing I need to show in the UI. I create a new entity and create a new widget or whatever on the client to display. But going back to this storage, then, if we agree that this thing now runs on the backend, I would put this app-specific shopping cart also here. If there is a way, if there is a requirement to, like, let's say if web app of kind of Amazon is talking to this backend and not this backend, and the shopping cart still needs to synchronize between clients and web, which is independent, then this element will also need to go all the way through to the real backend. Yeah, so depending on how the project is structured. But if we are talking only about apps and app-specific stuff, we can, for now, put it here in the diagram.
Okay, so you mentioned about server-driven UI. So one of the requirements, we have lots of different items, right? And so we're not just like selling like one item.
Yeah.
And so there are two problems with this. The first one, how we're gonna handle item types. I mean, like, they can be added anytime, and so like storing them, etc. And second one, how can we render it? So imagine like you try to add a new item to sell, and you don't really want to go and just update all the clients, right?
Yeah, of course you don't want. That's kind of the whole purpose of server-driven UI. So we would have, I don't know if I need to go into this like smaller details, but we would need some kind of model product. And product would have, I'm just guessing for now, it would have an ID. Have a main, have a price, probably. I don't know. Put int for now, but this is much more complicated if we dig deep into details, like currencies and stuff like that. But for now, I guess it would have an image and lots of others, like image would be a URL. And of course, it will have lots of extra information that will be needed on the product. So we have this generic product data class, and it's here in the client entities. Okay. I don't know which kind of backend API, whatever backend team came up with. I might not like what they came up with. Usually I don't like, or maybe there is a GraphQL, or maybe there is, I don't know, binary format of communication. But in the end, I would like to have this product. And in the most simple case, we would have like a list of product things delivered. And when we need to add a new product, somewhere there is, behind this backend, somewhere there is a CMS where somebody, product manager or sales agent, is creating new products. I don't know, new boots. And those boots are created through some kind of CMS, and then they're available. This layer is kind of headless CMS that is specific for our app. So if the product is available in the recommendations, I guess here there would be like a recommendations API. We can talk about API at the backend a bit more if you want to. But I'm assuming there would be recommendations API. Inside those recommendations, there will be those boots in some kind of data model that is for the backend. We would transform it into the list of cards. So there might be a data class for recommendation with some kind of fields inside, maybe a product link inside.
Okay.
And then here we would have a
let's
list.
maybe, like, we're running out of time, so let's maybe just switch gears a bit. I'm wondering, how would you build rendering of products? Because it seems like our current solution, we got this data class, which I'm going to have some like mandatory stuff, ID, name, price, etc. And then there are going to be a bunch of other things which might or may not be shared across different products. So, for example, if it's like you buying a mug, it's going to be its size, like 12, 16 ounces. If you're buying shoes, it's going to be its size, like different attributes. So, two questions: A, how would you store it? Second, how would you render it?
For this, I need to dig deeper into the data layer. So the data layer is probably the most complicated part of this whole thing. How to map or how to describe whatever the product requirements, whatever the business is, with the language that can be easily understood by the client. In terms of how exactly to render this, I think depending on the technology picked, it can be very easy. If there is like team of mostly juniors, and we need to go fast, the UI could be web. You could build a web view that can communicate with native things through some kind of JavaScript abstraction layer. And then you can run, I don't know, React Native on top of whatever you want. If we are going directly with Android, I would, with more like exact technologies to go with, I'll go with Jetpack Compose, because I think that this is the best way right now to make your life easy on the client in the presentation layer. There would be, of course, a view model that would be mapping kind of between those fields that we have in the data class or the data that we received and whatever components need to be displayed in the UI. And this would make it quite easy. If there is no Jetpack Compose, you can also build the same thing using Recycler View and Adapter with the custom adapter classes, and basically mapping between the data and the widget that you want to display. I think Airbnb is doing that with the epoxy, for example. Instagram is doing that. Spotify was doing that. There are many solutions, and many people are using this approach.
Got it. So can you pinpoint a single one? Which one would you go with? So let's.
Yeah, okay.
We only have Android app, for example, right? We don't care about OS app. Someone else, some other team build this.
Okay.
So
let's limit. That's a good idea. Thanks. I would still struggle between Flutter and Compose, but let's say Android only. Let's go with Compose. I think it will be, if we are mostly juniors and the team needs the skill set, I think people will be more excited to use Jetpack Compose. New technology from Google looks like it's gonna stay for a while, so let's go with that.
Okay. So you decided to render UI with Compose, right? And now we have. So we have backend-driven, server-driven UI. So we don't know exactly what, what products we're going to be rendering. So how would you address this?
Yeah, this I need to think a little bit because many different products is. So let's do it like that. There is. In which layer can I solve this? So I'm just thinking out loud. Somebody is gonna add a new product, like I don't know, shoes with lots of custom properties. I'm guessing that for the web version, they would need to have a template that's gonna display that. So the client either can follow the web directly and kind of use the web template as the kind of how UI is gonna look, or there can also be a way to have an app-specific page that would need to be published. I would then, for the product that is on the, Let me think. So the product that is in the list of search bar and recommendations, I guess this could be a generic product that doesn't really need all those fields that are extra. I don't know, shoe size or something. You would need those on the details page for sure. There you would want to pick between different kinds of shoes, different colors and things like that. So the way this could be solved is if, let's go that we are building a very nice native Android application. We have a big team. So we can support that. We would need to agree, of course, with the product owner, so whoever is above making all the decisions, kind of. But I would suggest we could allow to publish a page on this layer. So let's say, so it's no longer just a transformer and business logic. There is also a, let's call it page engine. If we have a page engine that has a title, text, images, some kind of checkbox selector, whatever, we can split. Instead of having a list of products, we can have list of widget. Widget could be like a data class. And then we could have data class paragraph. Data class image slider. Data class size selector. Things like that. So we kind of build those data classes and we slice our whole page, our template, into a list of those things that we need to display. So a single page for the product could be represented by, as I mentioned, like a title, then the name of the product, then a slider for images of the product, a price selector, a size selector, color selector, and things like that. This goes all the way through to the client entities, post-processed if necessary, and then the Jetpack Compose displayed in the UI. And then in the UI, every UI widget or component is very simple. We just need to show a paragraph or an image slider.
Okay. All right. So I guess I see where this goes. So let's talk about the storage. What exactly are you going to be storing and how?
This one or this one?
I'm mostly interested in client storage.
Okay, let's see. Shopping cart. So we would need an amount and product, and the product could be just an ID. So just thinking if there's anything that can bite us later. So the IDs that we are using, they are not generated on the client and they're on the backend. So it's like backend ID. Let's say I've added a couple of products to the shopping cart. Do we need to show?
Let's maybe like step back a bit. Like what kind of storage do you have in mind?
Well, to keep things simple, if it's not something complicated with lots of connections, I would just go with the shared preferences.
Okay.
All right, so just no SQL, something just stored JSON inside. There can be downsides because shared preferences are loaded when the application loads, but there are like new libraries that are kind of similar, but they're working better. There is a storage, the new storage library by Google, as far as I recall. Maybe this can be used, but for the simplicity, the way this can be kind of abstracted away, you can abstract this through the caching layer, let's say, implement a generic cache, the cache that can save and load, and you can have multiple implementations, and the first most simple implementation would be shared preferences. And if product grows and you see, okay, it makes sense, or there are some issues with shared preferences, security or whatever, that you're not comfortable with, you can go with a more complicated implementation, including even the proper SQL database.
Okay, so if you go with shared preferences, what will happen if you have many items? So like imagine you have like 1,000 and 1,000 items.
Yeah, this could be a problem, as I said, because if we load all of this data when the app starts, it can slow down the startup time.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, it will be instantly available because everything loads into memory. Another downside is that it's going to be in the memory. So if there's like lots of really lots of items, you can end up with some kind of memory issues in the product, which is not very nice. But if we go iteratively with this and we start with shared preferences and we launch and we see it works, and then we see this, okay, there is a problem, then we can change the implementation, update the client, and then go with I don't know if there is any good NoSQL solutions, because it looks like we don't need the complexity of tables and links between tables and like complicated data here. So I would try to avoid SQL as much as possible, I guess, unless I really see that we need to store products individually and we need to link to those, so there's some kind of relationship between data elements.
Got it. And so basically, you mentioned that we need to store the shopping cart, right? And
Yeah.
then there was another layer for caching. So what exactly are we going to be caching?
So the caching I'm talking about is just to abstract things away, just so we have the flexibility to decide how exactly do we want to cache. We might want to have multiple layers of caching. For example, first you cache in memory, and then you cache into shared preferences kind of fast, and then maybe you go to the disk cache. And then when you're working with the shopping cart, you would be hitting the data coming from the memory cache, so you can quickly display it on the screen. And then if there is nothing in the memory cache, because maybe, I don't know, device was rotated or application was restarted, then you fall back to shared preferences or disk. And if there is completely nothing, then you go to the network. This would be kind of a cache abstraction there, yeah. And we would be still storing the shopping cart products or IDs and an amount of things that we want to buy. The only downside now that I'm talking about this that I see is that again, we will have the network when user will try to purchase. So we just show the shopping cart. That will the user need to finish the user won't be able to finish the purchase if he's offline. So I guess we can rely on getting the product details coming from the network, even though if we store shopping cart locally offline, we would need user to go online. Maybe we show some kind of UI message, sorry, you need to go online to make the purchase. And at this moment, we would fetch fresh stuff, like because price might have changed.
Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting topic. We have a couple of minutes left. So what about state synchronization? So imagine you might have multiple cards on multiple devices, right? And some of them might be offline. So how would you address this one?
Okay, so I guess user won't be happy if something gonna get lost from the shopping cart. Well, there are multiple strategies that we can use. This is not an easy thing to solve, I think, because user knows the best what's in the shopping cart. Might be in this case, it would be a good idea to let user do the synchronization for us. So there is a local state that we just saved in the shopping cart, and there will be another state that is coming from our backend storage. And if those differ with each other, we might show user some kind of dialogue and say, okay, like maybe we try to auto synchronize those states ourselves on the backend, like in this layer here. And if we fail, then we might ask user to do that because user knows better.
Okay, so basically it's going to be like some kind of like merging UI. So you said, okay,
yeah,
those are like all the other cards.
Yeah, this is more complicated for the user, for the UI to build on the client. But in this specific case, because shopping cart is kind of important, maybe you have added a very important item there, and then it got lost. You will be very, very angry, I guess. So we should definitely show something to the user, either that or say that some things got removed during synchronization. So there still needs to be some kind of notification to the user, I think.
Got it. Okay. And I think we are on a 45-minute mark.
Okay.
So we can jump to the feedback. I think that's a document.
Keep my screen sharing, but I don't see the video then.
So I'm not going to be sharing my screen. I'm just going to share the link so people can follow it.
Okay, so I keep my diagram on the screen.
Yeah, it's good to have because this way we can just refer to this. Post it. All right, so introduction, very short. I mean, you're supposed to keep it short, but I'll basically just maybe talk more about like your responsibilities. Like, hey, I'm running the team, or I'm a tech lead, something like that. It doesn't necessarily like add too much to the interview because the interviewer gonna have your resume in front of them, like right before. But could be good. So for getting requirements, you kind of started from like an interesting perspective when talking about resources. So I was not sure about what kind of resources we're talking about a while until you mentioned that it's like team and stuff. And I believe we spent like something like 3 to 4 minutes on this. So like that's a good approach. That okay, I'm first of all I'm thinking in terms of the team and like what we can do when we need to ship. But in this case, I would not go like too deep. So I said, like, what kind of resources we have? I said, okay, we're Amazon, for example. We have a lot. And in a bigger company, you would expect most like junior members to do the work, which is expected. So they require some coaching, some support, and guidance. And I like that you ask about like product support, maintainability. That's really good. Like in terms of scope and size, would be good to ask about, okay, how many clients do we have? I said, okay, we have like 1 billion, right?
Yeah, I just guessed with from the resources, I just guessed everything there is and all the users, all the countries, all the platforms, all devices.
Okay, and probably would be good to ask about the target platform. So what exactly we're doing? Are we building for iOS, Android? Are we building hybrid? Do we need to also support web? Because you touch it like, oh, we have a domain which we're going to be sharing, but like what exactly we're going to be sharing? This part might be like go in more details, but eventually with the scope, I said, okay, let's talk about client and the API. So probably we don't really need to go this deep. Yeah, so you also touched on GDPR, remote configs. Those are very good things to discuss. I would probably also bring the privacy, and privacy might go first. And privacy is very important, not like how you actually build the privacy, but the user perception privacy. So for example, if you send in too much traffic and someone would just try to catch this traffic and said, okay, so definitely spying on us. And now you have like lawsuits, so you have negative publicity. So I would probably put privacy first. And we quickly jump to diagramming. So we spent, let's see, we spent 7 minutes on gather requirements, and like 40% of it is like about resource allocation, like team and stuff. So we can totally cut this up. So you provide the signals that you care about those things, but I would not go like very deep in actually discussing and trying to figure out, okay, so how many juniors, etc. So one of the requirements which I put is like, oh, we have pretty much dynamic content. We have lots of items, we have cards, right? So like a good thing to ask would be, what kind of items are we going to be running? Are they fixed? Because if the item count, if the item types are fixed, it's easy. You just go and build it, and every time you would need to do something new, you would need to roll out update, right? And another thing, like how many items? So if it's going to be like millions and millions of browsable items, that really changes the way you build the app. So how many users? We already touched this one. And what about cards? Like how do we deliver cards? Where do we show cards, etc. And when I put that we want to sync the shopping cart, it would be good to expand this a bit more. For example, how fast do we need to do that? Should it be like real time? So you just put something, it's like immediately shows another card. Will it be like eventual consistency, right? like what our conflict resolution. Do we need conflict resolution strategy, or basically like first come first serve? Yeah, login authentication. You mentioned it down the road, but it's an important part. It can probably be put out of scope like right away. Also, in terms of like offline functionality, that's I would say kind of must. But like if you mention offline would be good, exactly what we're doing. So that, okay, we would like to persist card, and like you don't really need to ask question like, do we need to do something? You should be driving this effort, especially like if you're a senior candidate. So you expected to basically own this conversation, right? Then we jumped to high-level discussion. That took a bit longer. It took almost 90 minutes. And the approach was not really clear. So we started like backend, domain, app client, but then like the main layer was kind of like shifting between client and backend. And you offered a couple of different approaches, but you should be firm in your decisions. So we said, okay, we can do it on a client and the backend, and those are pros and cons. And I select this one exactly for this reason. So said, okay, because it's simple, it's a justification, but it's not an easy one to sell to stakeholders. Data transformer like was a bit confusing, so that's why I ask you to justify its existence and basically, okay, we would like to transform backend entities to the client entities, basically, that this way we decouple them. And it's a very good justification. But then it actually comes to like reusing business logic. So now, okay, the purpose of this component becomes like less defined. And like I got confused in this part. Then you mentioned about how we're going to share business logic, about meta language, etc. I would not recommend overcomplicating the design, because this is generally a bad sign when you haven't covered like the high level stuff, but already jumped into very complicated implementation details about how we're going to share, what techniques we're going to be using. It's generally not a good sign when the candidate quickly moves to some very specific domain without being explicitly asked to do so. Also, you mentioned about, okay, junior is going to be doing this one. This one would be hard, but I'm going to handle it myself. This is a red flag in terms of teamwork. As a senior engineer, you're not trying to solve like problems yourself. Your role is to discover the problem first, and then offer solution and help other people to deliver result, because otherwise it doesn't scale. If you're going to be going and just build all the fun and exciting parts yourself, it doesn't scale. Like unless you're going to be working like 80 hours a week, you won't go far. So it's better to let people do the job, even it's not as effective as if you do it yourself. You might be a much better asset doing like strategic work. So we're talking about like L6 level candidate. We're not talking about L5 stuff like that.
Yeah, this is a little bit confusing for me, because when you say senior, for me, senior means a little bit different. So what you are saying is more like staff level, but I understand that levels are different between Google and I didn't work in big companies yet.
Okay, but you started strong. So you really started like a staff. So before even just gathering requirements, you start talking about markets, team structure, and it's a clear signal that you aiming to a higher level. So imagine like you're applying to L5 position, right? And then you start like asking all those questions and you deliver design. And I would go and recommend it to a high level. There's an option to recommend to a high level or lower level. So you can pull it off, but usually when a staff candidate comes into pipeline, it's a bit different from level 5 and level 4. So like seniors and middle. Okay, then you also, okay, the next point, we spent too much time just like talking about transformer and stuff. So my simple question was, okay, please justify its existence. And said, okay, we would like to separate as the client and the backend. That should be enough. But we went ahead and just spent ridiculous amount of time talking about this. And so I have to like basically like steer away, said, okay, I got it. Let's just move on. Then he brought up modernization. Said, oh, modernization is good, but are there any like disadvantages of modernization? Like how would you structure your projects? Would you use like monorepo or many different repos? Can anything go wrong? How would you synchronize versions, etc.? So, like if you bring up modernization, you should explain what kind of problems are you trying to solve this way. And said modernization is good. Well, it doesn't provide lots of signal.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was the point, that telling that like some stuff, for example, is not important. And this is when we talk about UI. So, okay, so UI layer, it's not important, right? It is important because you're trying to deliver design, and effectively, whatever you building right now should be used as a guidance for the team to build and deliver the product. So if you say it's not important, that means people would do like whatever way they feel necessary and might not necessarily be the best choice for the project itself. Then we got like post-processing layer, and that got me a hell of confusion because now I have transformer and now we have post-processing. So then I need to like ask lots of questions. So what exactly are we doing and stuff like that. So if you introduce some component, make sure that you're crystal clear why it exists. So what kind of problem you're trying to solve by introducing another component, because adding, like throwing a bunch of components, A, it's complicated design, and B, it's not free. So someone has to build it. Okay. And then you said, okay, so server-driven UI. We're going to be using server-driven UI. And this is the first time it's been mentioned, or maybe I missed it. If you think about like server-driven UI, that's a very important part. Well, we started with like, okay, UI is not important, but now it's server-driven UI. So maybe we would need to mention it a bit early on. Otherwise, we just started, okay, we're going to transform backend entities to client entities, which is a good thing to do in terms of decoupling, but server-driven UI is much, much more important topic than this. So I would probably like change priorities in terms of how to deliver those things. Then we spoke about adding favorites. So don't try to add extra requirements after requirement gathering stage, because this way you just add more stuff which you have to explain. And this is like not a very good sign as well, because A, you should be like very concrete in what you're building. So if you add in requirements after we discuss them, that means that you don't have a clear picture of what you're trying to build. And I would try to avoid this. Then once again, this cross-platform stuff. We said, okay, if it's, we might want to use backend. And okay, so backend for state synchronization. And yeah, but you said we can use backend because it's good. And now I'm curious, like what other options do you have? And you said, oh, we can backup shared preferences, right? So for example, you use Google Play services or Firebase. We build them worldwide, and you remember those things are not available in China, for example. So we already flashed in the market. And it's, if you bring something, and it's justification shouldn't be, oh, because it's a Google product. Oh, it's well known. That's a poor justification. You said, we gonna, for example, use Firebase because it can really save us some time on building like synchronization layer and backend storage. But if you're Amazon, for example, you don't care about those things. You already have all the infrastructure you can use. Then you throw a repository. You know, it's like kind of out of the blue, and I was not sure what exactly. So usually repository mediates between data sources. And in this case, it was not very clear because it, oh, repository is basically API. And if you have repositories, so you probably have like local and remote data storage or something like this, caching. So if you use some architecture pattern, your best bet is not to assume that your interviewer is very familiar with that. You say, okay, I'm going to be using a repository pattern, and this is why, because I need to hide data sources from our consumers. Then we got batch sync, and batch sync was also not locally defined as something about we go worldwide. So I would say this company is very confusing, especially its name. So imagine like you I screenshot this and I send it to hiring committee. And they look at this and like, okay, the diagram is a bit confusing because like I'm not going to be able to build a system just looking at this, because the purpose of some components and naming, like you have two storages, the separation of concerns between backend and client, not very well defined. So that would be very, very confusing, especially for the person who are not a part of the interview. Okay. And one recommendation, you should be more assertive on your design. You would bring a couple of things. Oh, so we can do it this way, this way, this way, right? So it's like throwing them on a table, and you are the driver. So you have to say, like, those are options we have, but I'm going to go with this one, and this is exactly why. And you should justify. So everything you do should have a clear justification, because without proper justification, people would just say no, like, oh, we want to do this. And they said, we cannot see any good business reason to do this. And they would cut it out in favor of some other initiative would going to be much better explained. And like the biggest takeout for me is that like the thought process from your end was a little bit chaotic. Like jumping between stuff, trying to dig deep into implementation details. So be mindful with your time and be like more careful of how you deliver stuff. Remember, implementation details, they're not as important as the like big picture, and we can always dig deeper. If I would want to dig deeper something, I would like guide you in one or another direction. So it comes with practice. Just make sure that you practice more, because it's very hard to do it on the spot, especially if you're not accustomed to this. So that took a lot of time. It took 90 minutes, which should take like 10 minutes stop. And then I tried to move you into server-driven UI. And you said, okay, I'm not sure what kind of backend API would have. And basically, usually you do. Like if you're driving this effort, you expect it to work closer with the backend team, like with like PAs like product analysis, etc. You would be driving lots of different decisions, and you would expect to negotiate it. So say, oh, this is just coming from above, and I'm just stuck to that. This is really not a good way of addressing this. Like one thing which I noticed, that you keep going back to backend. And we don't need to do that. We put a scope, client, and API. You can talk about API, but you don't need to worry about the backend. You can influence it, but you don't care. There's lots of stuff like depending on the technology. You need to be very firm on the technology. So you started like backend rendering. You said, oh, we're going to be using WebView, right? And it's a viable approach, but you would also explain why that might be a bad idea. How about performance? How about memory consumption? How about user experience? How about security, right? Then said, okay, Jetpack Compose, it's a nice and shiny way. Okay, are there any issues with Jetpack Compose? Maybe there are certain performance issues, right? It's a very new technology. Yes, it's in beta. It's widely adopted by bigger companies, but are there any issues? There are. So, but it has nothing to do with server-driven UI. So what I expected is you said, okay, since we don't know anything about our items, we might be better off to provide some kind of generic templates which we can deliver and render. And this is like, if I'm not mistaken, this is what Airbnb does. Like their UI doesn't know what exactly it's showing. It's like, oh, I'm going to be showing those two elements, and this is how they're going to impact. But certain problems, how would you make sure that it's backward compatible? So now you try to add a new UI element, and your earlier clients doesn't support it. Your earlier client would not support it. What would you do? So pros and cons, right? And just jump into, oh, it could be WebView, it could be Jetpack Compose, it could be a Recycle View. It's basically like moving away from initial question, just trying to talk about implementation like details. Also about how would you show it? You really need to negotiate this. So like you partially got it, said, okay, so maybe we don't need to display complex information when we're just browsing stuff, like our search results. So maybe an image, a name, and a price would be sufficient. And then we could jump into a detail screen and show a full-blown UI, right? And then we started talking about like this page engine, etc. But how would that be tied to Jetpack Compose? Like this was not very clear. And lots of philosophical discussion about product owners, teams, how they would like talk, how they decide. And the one thing which I saw, you try to jump quickly to implementation details, like try to write some Kotlin code. This is not high-level design, honestly. And it doesn't provide signal because like in this Kotlin classes, it may be, okay, ID, name, title, description, or some other like classes. So before doing this, I would say, okay, so we're going to be using a widget-based system. So we're moving away from the like products. We have a like very, very dumb UI, which knows how to render UI, how to render some widgets, which come from backend, right? And then we're gonna add some operations or events. So for example, you click on an event and it can capture some context, like maybe a widget ID, I don't know, and our domain engine would handle it. It could be like pure server driven. So everything you do, you just like send it back to the server and then bring back some more UI to render. Or we're gonna do it on the client, pros and cons. Like lots of stuff to cover outside of Kotlin classes. Okay, then we kind of move to the storage and same implementation details. So product ID, name, it's like trying to render database schema. I would step back and first of all, I would be like very, very clear what exactly I'm storing. So I said, we have a shopping cart. We probably need to have like a cached version and a persistent version. Maybe in some effort. What's the source of truth? Like how would we update state? How would we store it? So for example, I said, we're going to be storing the shared preferences. Shared preferences are very, very slow. And genuinely, it's not a recommended way of doing things right now. Said, okay, we can use this library from Jetpack data store. Okay, so why would you use this library? You also said we would stay away from SQL as much as possible. Why we would stay from SQL? So all those things should be very well explained. So, okay, this is why I need storage in the first place. This is what I'm going to be storing. This is how I'm going to be storing. And those are alternatives, which I'm not going to consider right now. And to keep things simple, it's not a good justification because A, you make a simple stuff and you shipped it. And now you can see there is a severe performance issues and you cannot update the clients. And you have 1 star on store. And people just like quickly up because you try to keep things simple. You should be very careful what you ship because everything you ship is final and will never come back. Okay, and like we were like running low on time, so I tried to focus on different area about state synchronization. And for this one, like once again, you pick an option and basically, oh, we're gonna do this. Okay, are there any alternative options, pros and cons? How would we justify? And like what issues? So for example, we have multiple devices and now we have conflicting items in a cart. So on one cart, you said, I'm going to have like 2 of those. On the other cart, you say, I'm going to have 3 of those. And the third cart say, oh, I'm going to delete this item altogether. How would you merge it? So imagine like how confusing the user going to be. It's going to be like 4 to 5-way merge UI. And remember that user might be not very sophisticated, especially if we're talking about worldwide. So your UX is critical. The more stuff you can hide away, the better. Because otherwise you would need to put some UI explaining how this works, right? Oh, so here is like merging flow. That's expensive. Yeah, so this is all the feedback I have. And I would like to invite audience members to provide their input as well. Anyone? Okay, Sergey.
Yeah, guys, hi, what's up? So first of all, thank you for the interview. This was very useful for me and also, I guess, for guys too. So the question actually to Alex, I already looked at a few interviews here and noticed that almost all of interviewees use drawing high-level diagram with a splitting by the layers. So as for me, this high-level diagrams, it's follows same rules that the project structure, and it would be better to read and better scalable if we split it by the features. So if we take a look at this diagram that Anton drawn, actually we can see that actually there is no any functional requirements covered there. So we see non-functional requirements, but you as an interviewer can't provide any feedback based on functional requirements. So question for you, does it better to split it by features, not by layers?
Like, would be interesting to see an alternative representation. I don't try to say that what I'm doing is correct, right? But it's the best one I know. It worked really well in my own experience and worked well for other people because I keep getting feedback about people getting offers, and like this approach worked. I'd be happy to have you on board next time, and you can show your feature approach. And if we learn something new, that would be amazing. So what interviewer is looking for a signal? So the signal I got from Anton, okay, no requirement discussion, just jump straight into action. Very low implementation detail, a lot of low implementation details. So for example, we started discussion with basically this data transformer. I would say I would push it back and start, okay, so we have, this is, if we want to do like this, like layered stuff, okay, so this is backend, this is client, this is domain, this is UI, this is like use cases, I don't know, like any way you feel it. The point, it should be something you can take, go back to the team and implement it. So for example, if you take a diagram from the guide, you can look at this and every component could be done as a module. And you can see how data flows, what depends on what. You can bring it down and say, okay, now you build this. Like if you look at this diagram, say, that would be extremely challenging to do without additional explanation. And it would be challenging to understand from the point of view of a hiring committee. So whatever you do, like you may even skip diagrams altogether, just don't write text. It should be clear in terms of how you think. So what's important, you are capable of thinking in abstractions, high-level abstractions, which just shows what are major components of the system and how they communicate. If you go very low level, and the reason I didn't push too much in this, because I got all the signal I need. And the purpose of the interview is not to build a solution. The purpose of the interview is to evaluate the candidate. How well are they suited for the role, right? So doesn't matter if we finish it. I'm just gathering signals. I'm writing reports, and then they're going to be rubrics. So how well candidate does on this rubric, like poor to extraordinary. So your goal is just to do as many extraordinaries as you can in a shorter amount of time. That means that you really know what you're doing, you're mindful of your time, and you're very, very precise in your answers. So you don't go and just spend like 10 minutes talking about just like one tiny thing, because it doesn't provide lots of signal. Oh, the candidate went really deep into this one, and I don't have enough signal to rate on any other rubrics. And that means that you might be passed as a candidate. So, but yeah, I'd be happy to have you next time. And I'm really thrilled to see the feature-based approach.
Yeah. So that's actually a great idea. So let's schedule the next time with my role.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't want to position myself as know-it-all. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm still learning myself. Like if we can find a better way, I'm happy to adopt it. I'm happy to update all the guides and recommend this like later down the road.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Hello. Yeah, this question that I wanted to ask is about the GDPR privacy part. So I noticed you paid special attention to that, but I didn't quite get what exactly was expected to be discussed in this section, or I don't know. I'm not European resident, so I have no idea about GDPR or anything like that. And I have never built apps for European markets, so I have no idea. Is that even important to discuss if you don't know anything about it? So
It's a very important in terms of we're building worldwide, right? And Europe is really tight on privacy stuff. So I saw those news that, oh, Facebook gonna move away its business from Europe because Europe would not allow transferring any user sensitive data back to United States. So what's important that Anton knows about GDPR. That's a signal, right?
So,
like,
if you just mention GDPR, that's already like a big plus.
So if he would say, okay, so let's talk about privacy, right? So what exactly, like, do we need to collect any user data? Do we need to identify users, right? It's a very good sign. It's a sign of a very senior candidate, because at some point you become less technical and more strategic. And being able to handle those correctly, it's a very strategic approach, because otherwise you can hit multi-billion lawsuits.
Okay, but as far as I know, it is mostly concerned with backend storage. So like you have to be able to delete stuff, you have to be able to provide data, stuff like that, right? So as a mobile,
it's a signal. It's a signal. So that was a very nice touch. So I would go and said, oh, that was the first candidate who mentioned GDPR. And this is really good. This is a huge plus. And even if we never touch it like anywhere. So if you know it exists, you might also know what kind of issues it may cause.
Okay,
and
thanks.
You have to be very strategic. So I would not just go and just try to throw lots of like words on the interviewer, because they might try and probe you deeper. But it's good, like if you don't know about those things, you can go and learn about it and why it is important. And I said, it's really important. In some of the companies I worked, that was a huge deal. Yeah, but it's a good question. My answer, you provide signal.
Another point I just noticed in a lot of these system design interviews concerning mobile apps, they all look kind of similar. So the general structure of the app is almost always the same. So like backend, then there is the main layer, data layer, UI layer. And is it even important to discuss this high-level design that is present in every app, basically? You could just really quickly draw that thing, and then the hard parts are usually in details, right? So when you discuss like communication protocols, maybe, or so. I'm not sure if I should spend a lot of time on this high-level design. That's just a pattern, basically, that's used everywhere.
So I would say it would look like all the same if you have exposure to this. So for example, if you look through a bunch of mocks, and all the mocks are pretty much the same. So we got requirements, we have outer scope, like functional, non-functional, then high-level diagram, and like technically there is nothing too interesting in the apps themselves. Under the hood, in 99% of cases, you receive some stuff from the internet, you transform it some way, you might store it, you present it, and you send something back. This covers like the vast majority of apps on the market, right? We can also talk about libraries, but same. Every system consists of some components. They should be very well defined, they should be decoupled, and each of them should have like one and a single function. And like if you try to skip all of this, that's generally not a good sign, because I want to go and just let's talk about protocols. And honestly, there is nothing too exciting about protocols as well. It really depends what you're trying to do. Like I was saying,
that was just an example.
Yeah, like I was setting in real-time data. Do we need bidirectional communication, etc.? So once again, you're showing signals, and the signals, you try to understand the problem before you tackle it. If you jump straight to protocols or any kind of implementation details without asking, okay, what exactly we're building? that's a bad sign, right? Then why do we need all those diagrams which look the same? Because hey, can you think in abstract way? And the reason it might be important because your interviewer has no idea about your history. So for example, if they would see you like doing like 10 mocks and already have an idea like what your thought process is, but a candidate comes, it's a blank slate. We have no prior knowledge except for the resume. And if you know the candidate, most likely they're not going to pair you on the interview. If there is a better way, I would love to learn it. Like, this is something I figured out by looking at backend interviews. So the whole idea of like putting this like, oh, introduction, requirements, high level, deep dive, whatever, it comes from like backend interviews. But if you look at those, they pretty much the same in the structure, and of course there's the devil in the details. So the whole point of like any question can be turned upside down very easily, even if you like learn everything. I can throw something on top of this. So it's like, okay, so now you cannot use this one. What now? So that like
you had a real
believe,
systems interview, right? When you passed your interviews, and was it like something similar to this?
like I don't want to talk about it because right now I don't represent any company. If you would like to learn about interview process from a company, you should apply and talk to your recruiter because I cannot talk about any of those things. So in my experience over years, that the most confusing part that people have no idea how to structure the whole thing. They could be excellent engineers, they can be like building a bunch of stuff, but now there's like a new constrained environment. And worst part when the interviewer have no idea how to conduct it. So it's like bad time for both parties. But what I'm trying to say, this stuff does not represent any particular company. This is not what I've been trained as a part of my job or whatever. This comes from like experience and different approaches. And I did lots of interviews as a candidate myself, and I guess it works. I'm open for any alternative approaches. Did that answer your question? No?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's another person in the line.
Yeah, so disclaimer, use your best judgment. Don't trust random internet strangers and use it on your own risk. Okay, Charlie?
Hi Alex, hi Anton. Like great discussion. Actually,
I cannot hear you well. Can you maybe move closer to the microphone or maybe speak up?
Okay. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I am confused about the design. So I think is it good to add like a flow in while designing, like first talking about categories of products we are going to have, or maybe talk about like filters feature which we are going to have. Like, is it good to go with features like first, as Sergi has also pointed it out, like instead of going like discussing the API and then layers in the app?
Well, like if you're talking about search, it's a subsystem. What I would ask about items, like type of items, like is it like very important part? Is it predefined set, or are they like completely arbitrary and dynamic? And the way requirements being structured is that it's dynamic. It can be added anytime, and you have no assumptions about what kind of data you have. And based on this, like categories, I mean, yeah, categories are fine, but it wouldn't add too much to discussion, right? But knowing the type of items, the count, this would really affect your design. And one of the things you brought up, even if people said, okay, they're all fixed, your most immediate question, what happens if we want to add a new one? how would existing clients react? How would we push updates, etc.? So I tend to look at system design in a more high level, because if you want to talk implementation details, there's also domain knowledge interview, which just goes to API libraries, etc. Coding, like algorithms and stuff, and system design basically provides a signal on like how can you think, like your line of thoughts, what things you bring up first, what concerns you have, and like how robust your solution is. Solution itself is not that important. What's more important, like how you get there. So it's not the destination, it's a journey in this case. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, there is one more thing, we were discussing about server-driven UI. So is it like, I think this question is for Anton, like, is it like we are first fetching what kind of UI we want to show, and then we are going to fetch the data, like a list of items in that particular widget? Like, how is it going to be? Are we going to make 2 API calls, first to fetch UI and then to fetch data? Like, how is it going to be?
So the answer to that is kind of like HTML. You make one call and you get back a meta language that explains to your browser how this needs to be displayed on the screen. The same thing is with server-driven UI. You make one call, and then in another kind of meta language, server explains to your client that this needs to be an image, this needs to be text, this needs to be something with spacing, a delimiter or whatever. So you make one call, and the idea is that you need to represent your business and the data, like the information that business needs to display, somehow in a manner so that client is easy to build and easy to display this following instruction from the server. And if you put more things to the server, it's much easier to support multiple different clients, support different platforms, and fix bugs fast, because they are on the server. You can fix them fast, deploy, and client doesn't need to change.
Yeah, so I can piggyback on this. So it's under the hood client versus backend. Pros and cons. It's very hard to change anything on the client, right? The candidate is not expected to actually go and just figure it out on the spot, because it's a very hard problem. And if you don't have prior experience, it's pretty unlikely that you're gonna create anything adequate in 10 minutes, especially considering the stress of the interview. So, but what consideration you might want? Okay, everything I ship on the client is fine. I want it to be as much flexible as possible. So what happens if I would need to add more? How my current clients would handle it? Like how would we how would we make backward compatibility? Would there be versioning? Would there be like some kind of fallback, etc.? So implementation itself is not that important, but like concerns, like signals. So I believe this is the most important part to understand. Still depends on the interviewer. Someone really wants to go and do like nitty-gritty details, but I would personally go for strategy, because if you don't have experience, pretty unlikely you're gonna end up with something like very, very well thought and robust. Sharini, was that helpful?
Yeah, thanks for this. Yeah, I think strategies we need to focus more.
It also depends on the target level. Anton is senior, so I was mostly interested in like, okay, how will you handle bad weather scenarios? So what happens if? And implementation details, it's not very interesting. If, for example, we're talking about lower levels, maybe instead of just, hey, build Amazon, I would say build a shopping cart for Amazon. And then he said, okay, I'm going to be using this is how I'm going to build UI, this is going to be stored in the state. We can go deep into implementation details and whatever libraries of your choice, for example, because the lower the level, the candidate, the less strategic decisions they make. It's like more closer to the metal. in this case.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Okay, if not, going back to Anton, and how would you assess yourself? What went well? What could be better? And if you learned anything?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot to provide such an extensive feedback. I think it will be very helpful for me to kind of, when somebody else thinks, like consciously thinks about what you're talking about and how do you express thoughts. This is very helpful just to see someone else's perspective. I feel that I actually did quite well, I think. This is my personal feeling. I think I can answer on any question you can throw at me. On any kind of detail, complexity, I can come up with something. And what I lack is like focus and structure, and then your feedback will really help me structure my thoughts better and maybe prepare a bit more for the real interview if I will be having one, and then maybe better express my thoughts and better draw the diagram. The confusing part that I have is, on one hand, sometimes you want to go into details, or like you want the candidate to go into details. On the other hand, sometimes you need to be more like high level, and I can't yet get the balance between those things myself, but I'll need to think about it a bit more.
Yeah, I agree. It's all unpredictable. It really depends on the reviewer, what kind of signals they're looking for. It's a free form. So it's way less deterministic than coding, for example, or domain knowledge, because those are kind of binary, you know it or not. And the system design, like, oh, what do I want to know? And it really can change based on like how you structure your answer. And the reason Anton is here today, because last time he provided very good feedback on the candidate, but apparently once you got in a candidate seat, it's much harder, because when you're relaxed and you're watching it, you can clearly see like the big picture, you can see like everything. But when you need to deliver a solution and many people watching, it's much harder to do. So this way, you just need to practice more. And remember, being a good engineer and passing interviews are very different things. So they might not be like strongly correlated. Like you have to practice for both. So my point, being an outstanding engineer, experienced, whatever, would not necessarily guarantee that you're going to pass the interview. So it needs practice. Yeah, I think I did really well. And the performance itself, I would say it's not that critical, because there is no job. No matter how well you did, I'm not going to give you an offer. But it's good if you struggle, like at any time, and you learn something new. That means that you become a bit better. And this is the whole point of this venture.
Thanks a lot again. It was an interesting experience.
Awesome. Okay. Anyone else? All right. So I guess the rest was perfect, and I'll probably see you guys next time. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.